This project began 2009, 2010, when I attended the Providence Preservation Society Symposium on the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age is that period of time from the late 19th century to the early 20th century before there was an income tax, so that all of your income was yours. And it was the Gilded Age in Providence, the mecca of the Industrial Revolution. The buildings, the people, the wealth was incredible. So the symposium had a variety of discussions. And then Christopher Monkhouse, who was a curator of decorative arts at RISD some years ago, gave a talk about the Battle of the Punch Bowls. And it was about these silver companies like Gorham and Tiffany that created great objects that were used at world fairs. Signature pieces for both evaluation and hopefully for production. And there were many silver companies throughout the Northeast for sure and elsewhere. And throughout the symposium there was a discussion of the role of architecture and of course the fine arts of painting and sculpture. And then he commented about these three-handed loving cups, which were frequently created, and ascribed the handles to architecture, painting, and sculpture. And then later in the day, when there was a gala, it dawned on me, and I discussed with Christopher the idea of creating three-handed loving cups, only using different medium. So one thing led to another as I mulled this over, and there was a lot of positive response from artists, from curators, and from museums. And so I commissioned 10 artists to create a loving cup, preferably three-handled. Nancy Grinnell, Lisa Goddard at the Newport Art Museum embraced the concept. In the spring of 2011, we had a symposium at the Newport Art Museum where there was a lot of conversation, primarily about the history of loving cups and examples of all manner of material that was used in the creation by Ron ONORATO. It's not about three-handed loving cups. It's about the concept of three-handed loving cups, an object, which is interesting, beautiful, etc. But then take it a century ahead, stimulate the artists to think and create in a different milieu, if you will. Because I think that brings out the inherent genius in all of them. And I hope you will agree that what we have now are extraordinary objects of great interest and a story for each one about it, how it came to fruition.
My name's James Watkins. I'm really much more of a sculptor. I really enjoy making objects in 3 dimensions. A lot of the work that I do is, in spite of the fact that it's 3-dimensional, it's very, very frontal, very flat in a sense. More often than not, a very definite front and back, or, as some people like to say, well, there's really 2 fronts. I have to admit that I was a little challenged as to where to go with it. So I started out making a bunch of blown glass loving cups, and I enjoyed the process. I love that process. Very often when I'm stumped about where to go with work, I'll backtrack. I'll go back and start looking at older work that I've done. And I've always been taken with painting. One of my all-time favorites is El Greco, particularly a self-portrait. The book and the face are the more luminous objects in an otherwise very dark composition. This was, I thought, of a format that suited the project, and so I chose to represent the loving cup simply as a profile of a cup and with handles, and an oval to represent the human head. Things tend to happen organically. I initially do a drawing, which is very crude, and then from that I make clay relief. That then is cast in plaster. The clay is removed and the glass is cast into that relief. And the painting and gold leaf that is done on the back side. So we're reading through what is really a relatively thin piece of glass. It's only about 1 inch thick. In reality, the Loving Cup project to me is not about a cup at all. It's about community. It's about sharing the communion of man and what that means to us. Not necessarily in the religious sense, but in a spiritual sense.
My name is Howard Bentrey. The project started, I think, about 1.5 years ago. There was a symposium, and one of the speakers talked about the history of loving cups. Apparently, 3-handled loving cups are fairly rare. As I was listening to the history of them and looking at images, I realized that it could go back as far as what we would call an amphora. The reason the piece has a base is because an amphora would sit in the sand. It didn't sit on its own. Instead of producing handles, I would let the handles be part of the sculpture itself. So we cast the piece and then we literally carve the glass away to create the handle. And the handle has a little indentation on it, so it actually has a place to grip. And then I silver leafed the handles and the top, tarnished them, which is what silver would do, and placed it in its base. While this symposium was going on and an idea started coming to me, I did a drawing literally on the announcement for the symposium. That's how it always starts. It always starts with a drawing. And that's very much the way I work. I get visual stimuli. The casting process is a hot process. So we make the form, we make the mold, then take it to a glass factory. They actually pour the glass into it. We don't have any hot glass in my studio. It comes back, and then we go back in and we grind and reshape parts of it. So there's a lot of grinding, and then after all that's done, I come in and I do the leafing and the coloring. The idea of the title of the piece being called The Full Cup, well, I think it's references many things. First of all, the glass with its bubbles looks full. And he's so generous with what he does. He's helped so many artists that I think of Dr. Chazan as often being a full cup.
My name is Michael GLANCY. The part of this project that excites me the most is my discovery of the communal aspect of the drinking vessels from pre-Christian times to the guilds in Germany during the medieval times and to this period as well. Basically, the loving cup was a large cup filled with this spiced wine or ale and then drank by the community. I've never been a big fan of handles, so the concept for my participation in the Loving Cup project really found its fruition in designing 2 communal drinking vessels. Each one has the tradition of the bracketing the amount into equal segments and would be enjoyed by multiple people. My process begins in a hot shop, drawing a basic form, which I would consider to be a blank. Then I make a series of different drawings. A rubber self-adhesive stencil is placed on the object. It's carved using a sandblasting technique with the stenciling material still in place. The entire piece is sprayed with an electrically conductive paint. The stencil is then removed. Wires are attached to the object. And this is placed into an electroforming tank. Electroforming is placing one metal over a non-metallic model and you get a buildup of metal. And then in this case, the copper has been plated with silver because the loving cup tradition is mostly a silver tradition. Actually, it works really well. Has a capacity of 3 beers, roughly. It's a fine way to have a beverage.
My name is Ben Anderson. I'm usually working in clay, as a medium. I thought it'd be interesting to work on a project that really started with a natural form, having those constraints of a vessel, but then is also able to be passed. So I wanted to make a piece that would almost appear as if it were found, if it were dug up from the ground, if it had a past life maybe, almost as if you stumbled upon this thing in the forest, as if it's just a natural object, but yet it has a sort of function to it. In the way I work, and the way I've been working over the years, it's a lot about, there's different stages, and part of it is where I'm out in the landscape, out looking around at, finding objects, looking at things, and then bringing some of those things back to the studio and then making molds from them. The burl made sense because it was already this very natural, kind of stone-like, intriguing sort of form to begin with. And the handles, I just wanted something that was lyrical, something that had a lot of movement, a lot of sort of curves, and it could be kind of draped and wrapped around the object. I often use these shells mixed into this whole thing to kind of broaden the definition of the form, or references outside of the forms. So I wanted to make an object working in an improvisational style, letting the piece sort of lead me along and choosing certain elements that would make sense. That has this function, but then feels like it grew that way. It wasn't really made, it just sort of happened. And I think that's what I was interested in.
My name's Jonathan Bonner. When Joe came up with the idea, it was sort of a stumper for me. I couldn't, I went through many, many different concept variations. For one thing, it was supposed to be a 3-handled loving cup. Originally, cups had no handles, then they had 1 handle. And then the loving cup, was something that was used to pass around. If you're passing a cup and it's got another handle, you can both the recipient and the giver have a handle to hold on to. And the third one sort of moved it into this conceptual range in my head. And so that's basically the sort of springboard point for me. But anyway, then I landed on this idea of having basically 2 breasts, which is sort of the original loving cup. And they don't require handles. First I made a drawing, full-scale drawing, to figure out exactly the shape of the thing. From that drawing, I made a drawing that had all the templates for the different parts of the curves. And then I made the templates. And then I basically chucked it up on the lathe and started turning it. And I decided to make it out of nylon, which is a material that I really, really like. For one thing, it machines beautifully. And it's impervious to everything. The color range is, you got 2 choices, black or white. This is the black stock from which the nipples are going to be turned. The nipples unscrew, so then you can fill it up with whatever liquid you so desire. And it's hypoallergenic also.
James Reynolds. I do low relief metal work on a large scale, on an architectural scale. It's a repoussé. It's worked from the front and the back. sheet copper, tin, or stainless steel is worked from both sides, and the ultimate goal is to achieve a low relief panel that's installed on the wall. This is the copper cup I'm working on, which is a depiction of the Great Flood, which is just a subject I'm interested in. So it's the front and the back. Here's the front, and here's the back. So the relief comes out on the front. I use humble materials. I'm not a silversmith. I work in copper or tin plate even. So I cast the lid and the base in glass, which is a precious material or has a quality of jewel-like preciousness. And the body of the piece itself is out of the materials that I use. So I made one out of copper, but I've also made one out of a really basic tin. I wanted to build it up and break it down. The parts assemble and then they disassemble. So ultimately you end up with just a simple material like a little tin cup instead of some ornate, big, silver gewgaw, basically. It wasn't so much the history of the loving cup that I was that interested in. I was thinking more about the life of the individual who was awarded this object rather than the historical reference of the object itself. If you were to look at a life in a linear fashion, where it's got a beginning and then it's got a bulky middle of accomplishment and then it just ends. These loving cups, for instance, demarcate those accomplishments. You leave the accomplishment behind.
I'm Tim PHILBRICK. I'm a furniture maker. I design and build furniture of all types, and Joe Chazan has over the years been one of my favorite customers. I didn't know much about them before this symposium. I mean, I was familiar with the America's Cup and tennis trophies and sailing trophies, that kind of thing. But I didn't really know much about the historical uses and origins. And their origins, of course, are at least medieval. They were used as ceremonial drinking cups. And when Joe had a seminar at the Newport Art Museum last year, and I saw some truly amazing 19th century loving cups and made out of all kinds of materials. Most of them were silver, but others included handles made of elk horn, various different kinds of animal tusks, wood, bamboo. It was an amazing display of materials. And so my mind immediately went in that direction. In fact, I happened to own a couple of warthog tusks that I'd long been trying to figure out a way to incorporate into a piece of furniture. And I also had a couple of logs of ebony that I'd also had for years and had been looking for a way to incorporate into a piece. And the ebony is Gaboon ebony from Africa. It's so heavy that it will sink in water, and is now so valuable that it's sold by the pound, not by the board feet, the way most lumber is. So I had a wood turner named Beth Ireland up in Roslindale, turned the cup, and then I took my warthog tusks to Jeff Herman, who in fact used to work at Gorham, and he was the one who put the caps on and came up with a system for pinning and epoxying the tusks to the cup. I've been saving this for a special object, and so this was a good opportunity to put it to use.
My name is Ken SPEISER. As an artist, I generally work in both two-dimensional and three-dimensional. So when Joe came up to me and invited me to participate in this project of a three-handled loving cup, I was really interested. I had no idea that the loving cups came in different models, two-handled, three-handled. But when we went to the Tennis Hall of Fame, that's when my eyes really opened up and I saw what these loving cups could be. And it gave me the hook as to where I could be looking for information. So I started working with materials that were easy for me to work with, that were very friendly towards my idea, and it happened to be paper mache. My work tends to be very reductive. I really like to boil the piece down to as much of the essence as possible. Going through my picture file of loving cups, I focused on this particular one, which I really liked. And I began to think that it's very bra-like. So I went and I got a bunch of these. This was kind of like a three-cupped loving cup. Then I had these big polka dot bras, because now I needed something that was going to be more life-size to the cup experience. And I got this association between what's going on here and what's going on with my calendar. It's something that ties in directly. Like this shape, and this shape, and this shape, and this shape. These were the models for the loving cup. And then that brought me back to a myth that I always loved, that Mark Antony designed the first goblet that was based on Cleopatra's breast. And that was the origin of the goblet shape. And that always fascinated me. So now I'm beginning to think a loving cup is actually something that embraces. It is a cup that loves. It's like a hand. A hand is the first loving cup on a woman's breast. I had a young lady who works at Trinity Rep in the costume department. Her name is Sylvie Ray. She was just, I could not have done this without Sylvie. I was very happy with the way it came out. I think it was a beautiful, luscious, feminine, loving cup based on the same iconography that the original cups were made, but then the next association which has to do with feminism and breasts.
My name is Peter Pripp. I am a metalsmith. I work with a variety of different metals, materials. I make jewelry from time to time, but my big passion in working with metal really has to do with these constructions that I've been making in the last few years. This loving cup project was a wonderful opportunity for me to take a format that I'm familiar with and interpret it in a way that was meaningful to me. I'm very political, and it seemed to me that there was an opportunity to create a form that could be viewed in two different ways. The format of the loving cup and the way that it's configured, going from a large diameter at the top and tapering to the base with the three handles, resembled very much a ballistic form, a missile form. It is really a contrast of the term love, and loving, and the history of the loving cup, which is very much to do with this emotional connection to other human beings and this gift of love that you give. And then this other version of that same form or shape that has the exact opposite intent behind it. And so that irony was something that grabbed me right from the get-go. So I decided to pursue that as a direction for my project. My process basically with just about anything I make is to start with a line drawing. And from that line drawing I envision form. There's nothing predetermined when I begin, or very little that's predetermined when I begin a piece. And there's always the opportunity to respond to something that happens in some unexpected way. And I really like working in that way. It's an adventure. And hopefully the way in which I'm working these materials and assembling this and putting them together, there'll be some real elegance to the form. And so I want to have something that will draw the viewer in and obviously be appealing as an object, but it's have some aspects to it that inspire the viewer to think a little bit about the term loving cup and what it means. There's quite a bit going on here as I get deeper into this project that I find intriguing, much more so than I thought when I first began. So that's exciting to me.
I'm Steve EASTON. I am a glass sculptor. I make a kiln cast glass sculpture that uses the lost wax method. The lost wax method takes castings that are made out of wax, create a mold around it. The wax gets steamed out and the glass goes into the mold. Everything happens in the kiln. That's why it's called kiln cast glass. After the glass is cooled, the mold, which is called an investment, is removed, and what you're left with is a glass casting that's very highly detailed. In terms of the loving cup, it started out with this very rough drawing. Classical antiquity is a big influence on my work. I've always liked stuff from Greece and Rome. And what's so great about the loving cup is it's historic. I've researched the topic extensively. Wine was invented 2000 BCE. That's when they started making cups to serve the wine in. So by the time we were in the classical era, there were two-handled cups we see made out of silver from Greece. Also in Rome, there were glass two-handled cups. The addition of a third handle is a question mark, and there are all kinds of stories about why there's a third handle. One of them was the host would hand the cup over with holding onto two handles so the guest would see that he didn't have a dagger in his right hand that he was going to kill him with. In any event, the time period that I'm interested in is the Gilded Age in Newport from about 1857 to 1914. I love that Beaux-Arts aesthetic. The other thing about the loving cup is it ties in with forms that I've been working on for 2 or 3 years now. So my loving cup is a very classical urn shape. The question of the handles was very exciting, and I've had the opportunity to explore quite a bit and do several iterations of handles. I've learned a tremendous amount. I think this will be an ongoing exploration for me because it's that interesting.